To the African American experience. Where are we? We're here. All right. So, welcome to the African American experience. I'm Mark Harris. I will be your instructor and guide through this classroom experience. Those of you who are here physically in the classroom and those of you who are out in cyberspace. This course is offered for 4 credits. If you are enrolled in the class, you have access to the Moodle site, which also has a syllabus on it, and I'll be referring to the syllabus. But for now, let's get into the instruction. So here's how this will work physically. Anybody who's enrolled in the class can participate if they can in the physical class, which is happening, which basically is Monday and Wednesday, 1 to 2:50, so nearly 2 hours in the classroom, which is how I'm comfortable with doing it. But if you're not able to, this broadcast is being recorded and then will be available as YouTube links either by the end of the day or the following day. There is also a live stream which only happens during the broadcast in real time. So you can be watching from anywhere to be able to access that. The PowerPoints will be up later the same day when they're shown. If you don't have PowerPoint on your machine, I can make it as a PDF if you so desire. And with that, let's continue. So if you go to slide, please. The African American experience, down from the pyramids, up from slavery, winter term 2015. So we're basically looking at the period this term between 15,000 BC or before the Common Era, BCE, to the end of Reconstruction, 1877. Now, over the course of what was originally designed to be a 3-term class, so we're basically cutting it down to 2, only because it didn't go on fall because we had low enrollment, and et cetera, and now we got our numbers back up. So we are basically going from 15,000 to now in two terms. So in order to cover that amount of period, there are very few or no books that actually cover that period. Usually, in terms of the African American experience, people will start with slavery or 1619. Well, Africans were actually here on this continent, Turtle Island, that is North, Central, and South America, the ancient name for it, the pre-Columbian name for it, as early as 850 BC. Then that's according to the archaeological evidence. So one of the things in terms of talking about 15,000 is one of the reasons I start there is not simply because of the archaeological evidence, but to basically kind of reframe people's minds about, okay, if we basically go from genetic and archaeological evidence that the current science says that human beings are nearly at least 200,000, maybe 250,000 years old, and humanity originated in Africa. If we basically go with that scenario, then Africans have been around for 250 years, 1,000 years, right? And if we break out by races, then the people that we call quote-unquote white have been around for 22,000 years. All right, seen at that point of view. So the reason I'm starting at 15,000, start somewhere, is I want to describe a culture capable of building a pyramid. That's been capable of building a pyramid or cities. So I'm from Los Angeles, born in San Francisco. So I tend to be city-centric. Civilization basically is people who build cities, right? So the rapper Kanan from Somalia talks about in one of his raps, Africans taught the world how to live in cities. Like, what is it like to have 100,000 of you in one place? and you live along a river because you need a water source. Well, you also need a sense of, okay, I can't poop upstream in the river or within 200 feet of a river because it's contaminating people's water source downstream. You have to have that sense of living with 100,000 people. And in terms of infrastructure, I mean, think about the things that you rely on every day, being an American. Stable electrical grid, cell phone networks, things that you don't build. Turn on a tap, you got water. Flush a toilet, you don't have to worry about your poop. All that stuff is taken care of for you, right? Well, that's an infrastructure. And how long has that infrastructure been in existence? Okay, so we can trace flush toilets back to 15th century in Europe, right? But probably you didn't know that. But that's how long the technology has been in existence. Well, what are the other things that have been in existence for a long time? So I start at 15,000 and say, look, the slaves that were brought here in 1619 could have been doctors, could have been lawyers, could have been scientists in their culture of origin. They were just captured by force and then sent here, speaking 5 languages, because Africa is a continent, not a country, a continent where 2,000 languages are spoken. And that the Africans that we've had employed at Lane Community College, I'll use 2 of them because they're ancestors and I think they're exemplars. Akolié Uadibie, who was the former Dean of Social Science, and also Derek Mpinga, who was the former Dean of Math. So between them, they spoke 17 languages. Okay? So Derek was from Zimbabwe. He spoke 9 and was adding ASL, American Sign Language, and Spanish to his 9. Okay? So minimum, the African students that come here to Lane Community College, the minimum that I've seen in terms of language capability was 4 languages. So we come here, they will come here, from Africa, speaking, a colonial language, at least 1 or 2 colonial languages, French, German, English, whatever, plus a tribal language, plus Kiswahili or a trade language, and then English. And most Americans struggle with speaking even technical English. Like I can say something like enantiodromia, and somebody will say, well, speak English. Well, that is English. And I'll explain what enantiodromia is later, unless you really want to know what it is now. But the idea is, enantiodromia very simply is that which arises from its opposite. From its opposite. Okay, it's a Greek word. It's actually in the dictionary, and it means this. So let's say problems generate solutions. That's the first meaning. The solution that you created to address the problem creates a new problem. That's 2. 3, sometimes the problem that you have results from the way you see the problem. Okay, so I'm Lane Community College's drug counselor. So, problem needs solution. So, problem. 19th century women don't have the vote and are agitating for the vote. That's a problem if you're a white man in power, because you don't want anybody to have a vote except for, that's we the people, right? We the people doesn't mean all the human beings, and didn't mean your wife having the vote. So women are agitating for the vote because black people were agitating for the vote. Oh, we're citizens now. We have the vote, right? So women say, oh, we're citizens too. Why can't we have the vote? That's a problem. So the solution is give them the vote. Well, no, we're not going to do that. So problem creates a solution. So you're agitating for your rights. Maybe we think you're crazy because the people then who are deciding who's crazy and who's not are white men. Women are crazy because, well, they're hysterical, they're emotional. So the cure, that's a problem. It needs a solution. The solution was give them heroin. which was an over-the-counter drug. So, that solution creates an addiction problem, except we don't believe that it's an addictive drug. We're just passing it out willy-nilly. People are making money, and there's 250,000 heroin addicts in 1888. But that's not a problem, right? I'm not making this up, right? I'm just saying this is the history of, this culture. So problems generate solutions. Solutions generate new problems. The way you see the problem is the problem. Wait, people are protesting not having equal rights, and you think that's a problem. Why don't you give them equal rights? Adjust your thinking to give them equal rights. Very simple. Oh, well, no, all right? So that's enantiodromia. The African American experience is like that. Okay? So we generate civilization, and we share civilizations with everybody that we encounter that isn't African or African American, but then all of a sudden, we're considered to be savages, and so we have to kind of fight to be considered equal humans when we started humanity. Oh, how did we do that? So, can you go to slide and broadcast the slide? So this is a color shot of the of the syllabus, which basically I'm trying to illustrate. Down from the pyramids, up from slavery, 15,000 before the Common Era to 1877. So, and this is on the Moodle site. So we're starting from the top left, upper left. So the Great Pyramid in Egypt, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and picture writing. On the second row, a griot from Mali or Senegal playing a kora. So these are traditional historians, diplomats that were multilingual. They were kind of like the rappers of their time, and actually are the rappers of their time because they can actually make up a praise song right on the spot about the ancestry of the king that they're in front of. And they had to do this for multiple cultures. Yes, Eddie?
Also, as oral historians?
As oral historians, yes. Right. The picture next to that in the center is Queen Charlotte, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Black Queen of England. She is an Afro-European princess, so a German princess of African descent. And the reason I'm quoting her is because her descendant is Queen Elizabeth II. So, yes, Black Queen of England. Right next to Charlotte is a statue called La Mulata, which is 800 years old. So the reason I start African Americans before 1619 is obviously a statue that's created that's 800 years old of a black woman. Means we were here. Zumbe of Palmares. Palmares was one of the first non-native republics to be formed in the so-called New World. Next to him is Alexander Dumas. You notice his, so in your center, the center of your picture, you notice his afro. He is the French author who wrote The Three Musketeers. And his father was a black general under Napoleon. Next to him is Queen Nzinga of Angola, who was a military leader and political leader in what's now called Angola. And she led combat troops into battle against Europeans from the front.
What period, sorry?
Let's see. Nzinga was like 1700s because the enemy was the Portuguese.
Anti-colonial.
Anti-colonial, right. Nat Love, black cowboys. In fact, the term cowboys was originally applied derogatorily towards horsemen of color, cattlemen of color, who referred to them as cattlemen, but the derogatory term became cowboys. They called themselves cattlemen. The derogatory term was cowboys. So that term stuck and became the generic. This is a depiction of, the middle is a black pirate. Next to him is Harriet Tubman. And on the bottom is Moors playing chess, or actually the game that they're playing is called shatranj, which is the ancestor of the modern day chess. And then an Olmec head from 850 BC. So when I say African Americans, I'm basically dating, according to the archaeological evidence, to when we first came here, which is 2,500 years ago, not 1619. And we came here as traders, that is, trading information, genetics, architecture, religion, science, etc. And we partnered with other pyramid builders. So, just to point out that there's a different context. So, African and American, the obelisks were made from Egypt, and because of the Masons' influence, this country has often used Black African, or also known as Egyptian, symbology and architecture. And the Washington Monument is one of those examples. So African, American, and the African American experience. So the temple at Luxor. I'm having a senior moment in blanking on the black pirate's name, but we'll get to him later this term. Emmett Till, Trayvon Martin, and a chess game between a Klansman and a brother with a 9. The Klansman's bringing a knife, the brother is bringing a gun, because he understands what's real. That is to say, you know, it's a battle of the mind, and you bring the superior weapon. Klansman is bringing a knife to a gunfight. In art, we'll be discussing art somewhat. This is Owen's print of African American. Being mindful of your history, your culture, and also having the skills to deal with the things that are necessary to survive here in America in the 21st century. So, the African American experience, down from the pyramids, up from slavery. So this class takes its name from a quote from Dr. Wade Nobles, Afrocentric psychiatrist, psychologist, who once said of African Americans, "We're not up from slavery, we're down from the pyramids." So usually there is a principle that I'll illustrate in a few slides. Basically, it talks about the hero is the teller of the tale. So the way that we tell the tale is the way to reframe, to use my psychological training for counseling, for optimal psychology, that if there are basically lines of thought, basically in what I call the Columbus discovered America narrative, that basically suggests that the best that we can be as African Americans is what America defines us as. And we say, no, we're actually very much reduced. How is it an improvement for us to go from speaking multiple languages, being literate in math, being technologically and cultural literate, to being monolingual English speaking and unaware of any history or culture outside of what you present on television or the internet? How is that an improvement? Because there are people that will say, yeah, well, slavery improved black people. There are people that actually taught that on this campus within this same department. So, meaning we're a global people. So we're not up from slavery. We're down from the pyramids, meaning we're a global people, not a ghetto people. And we should basically think of ourselves and define ourselves as a global people operating on the world stage, which is not necessarily what America expects of us to do that. So, Hotep, which means peace in ancient Chaldeian. Salam, Shalama, Selam, Shalom, which means peace in the Semitic languages. Umoja, which is in Kiswahili, which means peace and also means unity. Meshika Tawe, all my relations, in Aztec. Gamshilakwan, which is Yankala Kalapuya, which is the native language that was spoken in this valley before contact. And there was a Jewish holiday, Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. Remembrance, that's remembrance in Hebrew, like its sister language Arabic, zikr, which also means remembrance. So zikr is the practice of zikr, la ilaha illallahu, which means there is no reality except God. To remember your true nature. So Hotep. So this is a prayer, if you will, for remembrance, peace, and understanding, whether you consider the year as 2015 or 5784. 5784, if you understand, if you're Jewish or whatever, it's older than the Jewish calendar. This is basically talking about dating from the culture that generated the pyramids. That's what year it is. So, in a continuing mission to dispel the forces of ignorance and oppression and encouraging unity, let's start. So, you've been taught differently. You've been taught to separate church and state as the church has separated spirituality from religion. Now, according to African psychiatrist Naeem Akbar, the difference between spirituality and religion is this. Spirituality is an experienced sense of connection to something greater than yourself. It doesn't require religion. Spirituality exists without religion. A religion is a set of prescribed exercises to develop spirituality. So religion can actually exist without spirituality because it's just the exercises. The exercises themselves are no guarantee that you will actually develop spirituality. But, yes, Eddie.
Spirituality has to come first.
Yes.
To be organized into a religion.
Yes.
Which may or may not maintain that spirituality.
Right. Okay? So, for example, usually what happens with a religion is that you have a charismatic figure that has a certain experience. Okay? Muhammad basically is illiterate, but he has this experience with the Archangel Gabriel. Boom, I'm dictating the Quran to you. The Archangel Gabriel is the same one who visited Daniel in the lion's den, that visited Mary, say, hey, you know, you're pregnant, and this is going to be the Messiah. Same angel, right, is attributed to all those three events in the Judeo-Christian and Muslim, which I put all together as the Abrahamic religions. Okay? So just, to give you that point of view, the Abrahamic or Abrahamic religions, okay, appearing in order, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All right? They all revere the patriarch Abraham. They all consider him sacred. Now, one of the things that you check out about Abraham and the Abrahamic religions is when we talk about, in English, the Judeo-Christian culture or ethic or whatever, right? Notice that they're leaving out Islamic, even though that they're using Islamic numbers. Algebra is Arabic. When you balance your checkbook, you are using Arabic numbers. There's a reason for that. Right? Try and balance your checkbook using Roman numerals. Okay? The Romans didn't have algebra or calculus or anything. Why is that? So why are we using Arabic numbers? Well, we'll find that out in this class. But the simple short answer is, well, they developed the science of doing that. Those things. They helped bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. Arabs and Jews. Or Africans. African people. So an Abrahamic religion is originating on the continent of Africa. So when we're talking about the Abrahamic religions, we're talking about people of color, as we pointed out, as we would put it here in contemporary politically correct terms, that whose basic spirituality, from whoever the charismatic figure was, they had an experience, and they're describing the experience, and if they write it down, because understand something about what you're doing now. The capacity to take notes came from a literate infrastructure that didn't exist thousands of years ago. Okay? The capacity for literacy, the people who built the pyramids, all right? Not everybody had the same degree of literacy. And throughout all Africa, not everybody had literacy. They did have oral traditions, but very few people could read and write. So, for example, the King James Version of the Bible, which people are familiar with, when King James created that version, it was illegal for the common people to read it. They could be actually put to death for reading the Bible. Okay? Understand that. When the Magna Carta was created in 1100, or 1200, whenever it was, 11 or 1200, 80% of the people, so that was basically a deal made between the nobles and the king. 80% of the people were basically serfs, i.e. slaves, i.e. illiterate, forbidden to read. Okay, so the rulers of the time understood if you suppress literacy, people can't revolt. They can't improve themselves. But this is America, so we want access. You were made to go to school, read and write, literacy. But that hasn't been the case. And so this culture of education, when we graduate, we wear cap and gown. That dates back to the time when the church ran the school. Okay? We're monks. All right? Or as a faculty person, I'm the monk, and you, the student, are the acolyte. Okay? And so I'm wearing monk's robes, and you're wearing, the cap and gown is the mortar, right? The thing that you are writing your lessons down, and you're wearing it on your head. And that dates back to when that was the case in Germany and Europe. All right? So back to slide, please. So you've been taught to separate church and state, as the church has separated spirituality from religion. So spirituality is the actual experience that you try and describe to people using analogy. So, for example, the original Trinity that Yeshua, who you know by his Greek name Jesus, described, this is according to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is one of the Gnostic Gospels. That is, it's a real gospel, but it's not included in the King James Version of the Bible, so therefore not taught as official doctrine. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene identifies the Trinity that Jesus taught as Mother, Father, and the child of true humanity. Mother, Father, child of true humanity. Notice the child's gender is not specified because it could be either one. right? And it's referring to a more ancient trinity where it's Oset, Osar, and Horus. Or in their Greek names, Isis, Osiris, mother, father, and Horus, or as he's known in Kemet, Heru, from where we get the English word hero. And there's reasons for that spirituality too. All right? So that history has been kind of like erased. So the idea, spirituality comes before religion, and a religion can basically be, the difference between a spirituality and religion is spirituality is the sense of connection, which may or may not be written down. But if it is written down as a collection of stories, parables, a way, scripture, hymns, precepts, etc., then it has a bureaucracy to support it, which will then, once you understand how bureaucracies work, bureaucracies are about maintaining themselves regardless of the spirit of them. Right? So, spirituality and religion. So the church also tells you that its view is the one that God gave it and the only truth. So notice how religions tend to do that. Our view is the correct view, and everybody else is not. Which might not be what the original person who was the inspiration for the religion taught, but becomes the way that the religion gets reinforced. Okay, so the church evolved into the state, and notice both church and state. The reason that we separated church and state is because of the excesses of the church, that is, in this particular instance, the Catholic Church, which did the Inquisition. Oh, we're going to torture you to test your faith because we don't really believe that you're faithful. Okay? That's why you had Protestant, people who protest the power of the church. And then they just break off a separate piece of Christianity, and it's Protestant. That's where that came from, in case you didn't know. So the state then has taught you to think of history as the dead past, irrelevant to now, instead of being present and influencing the future. Oh, don't bring up slavery. Is he going to bring up slavery? Yeah, well, of course I'm going to bring up slavery because it's older than what happened in America. So you have to understand that slavery is an economic condition, not a condition that defines people's humanity, even though it's been used to do that. Okay? So you've been told the tale. And so the African proverb, the hero is the teller of the tale. So I like to do things in threes just like in comedy. Right? Because threes work for people in terms of talking. So just like I said in non-theodromia, problems create solutions, solutions create new problems. The way you're seeing the problem is the problem. Yes, Eddie?
It's like the basic structure of the dialectical process.
Yes, correct. Exactly. Ancient, it works. So, it's an African proverb, the hero is the teller of the tale, that means three things. One, whoever tells the tale tells it to make themselves look good. Right? Duh. Each telling makes the teller look better and diminishes others in the tale. 3, knowing this, you can correct for the bias in the teller's point of view and learn to tell a larger story if the teller isn't already telling a larger story. Now, here's one of the things that happens in an African American class. People often expect it to be anti-white. In fact, this has been the position in terms of attacking ethnic studies in the state of Arizona. Oh, you're telling an anti-American story. Wait, we had a story before there was an America. What do you mean? That's what we're telling. That's not anti-white. We're just telling the story of what happened. What's wrong with that? Why does America have to be exclusive? Wait, border? Wait, before you got here, there wasn't no borders. We were fine. In fact, these people, that you call Mexican, they were people who came from the great pyramid cities of the South. And there was a trading relationship. Well, by the way, you guys were in the Dark Ages in Europe. We never had a Dark Ages here. We never had a Dark Ages in China. We never had a Dark Ages in Africa. The Dark Ages was just in Europe. We helped you out of it. So that's not anti-white. We're just telling a larger story than Columbus discovered America. Yes?
If it hadn't been for Arabic science, the European transatlantic voyages would never have been able to have taken place.
Eddie, that is so heretical, but true. So, hero is a teller of a tale. So here's the tale of basically the Columbus discovered America narrative. Narrative meaning it's a story. The hero tells. Columbus is celebrated, Columbus Day. So depending on where you are, if you're East Coast, that's a big deal. Italian parades in Chicago and New York City. But if you're here, West Coast, it's like, no, that's Indigenous Solidarity Day. We don't celebrate Columbus. So Columbus discovered America. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And who did he discover? Go ahead, answer. Who did he discover?
Native Americans.
We call them Native Americans, but when you were taught the 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, what were they called? Indians. Why? And savages, okay? So I love dictionaries. Okay? So, indios in Spanish. So, why were they called Indians?
Because they thought that they were going to make a route over to India.
They thought, that's the story that Columbus, that you have been told Columbus was looking for the route to India, right? And so, mistakenly, Columbus discovered, you must be Indians. Or, I don't know who you are, but you Indians now. More like that. I'm quoting Wade Nobles on that. But he's basically saying, he's basically illustrating 3 levels of power. Power over domination. I don't know who you are, but you Indians now. Or power with empowerment. Who are you people, according to your story? What's your story? And how do we make a story together? So that's the other third piece. Domination, power over, power with, and power together. I like to work it in 3s. Keep it simple for folks, right? So, Indios. Who did he discover? Indians, right? So, Indians. And that's from the narrative where he's looking for India. But the navigator, Pablo, I think his name, I actually have to look up his name again. But his Moorish navigator, Moor means black, right, in both Greek and Latin. His Moorish navigator knew, we ain't going to India. India is the other way. Okay, he's the navigator on the Nina, one of the smallest of the 3 ships. Nina, Santa Maria, what's the other one? Anyway, and the Pinta, right. So the Moorish navigator on the Nina knows, no, we ain't going to India. We're going to what the Africans call the circuit of the world. Yeah, you'll see this in a subsequent slide. So some people with Columbus, no, we ain't going to India. So another narrative with India is these folks that he discovered are in Dios. This is in Spanish. In Dios, that is in God, meaning they're just like God made them. Naked. You know, like Job said, naked into the world came I. Now they are, of course, dressed for the weather, because it's like 80 degrees in October down there in the Caribbean. So, where did Columbus discover them?
Hispaniola, which is
That's what the Spaniards called it. Good, Hispaniola. Or also San Salvador Island. Okay? Saint Salvador, the Savior Island. Right? And what did he write in his log about them? Well, he said they would make fine slaves. All right, so just think about the worldview of somebody who, you know, the first time I meet you, hey, you'd make a good slave. They're giving you gifts. They're giving you food. They're giving you consideration. Oh, cool. You're that white guy we heard about, the good white brother that came through 2,800 years ago and said he was, you know, spread a message of peace. So understand this narrative among the Cherokee. They have a legend about the Pale One who came around 2,800 years ago. So notice the time is before Christ. And this person, whatever pale means to them, doesn't necessarily mean he's white. But in European history, they have no record of anybody coming over here 2,800 years ago, you know, professing a message of peace. So he said he was going to, you know, he's professed a message of peace and then split, saying he was going to come back. So a lot of native people, oh, this must be the good white brother coming back. Right? So they welcomed him with gifts, which is part of the culture, right? But he thinks, oh, they would make fine slaves. Because he's coming over with a different agenda, meaning, and we'll talk about the doctrine of discovery, but right now we're talking about the hero as the teller of the tale, and I'm giving you a lot of backstory. So they would make fine slaves. And so what does the hero leave out of the narrative, leave out of the story? Well, obviously the backstory I've been telling you. Okay, so that backstory that I've been telling you is part of ethnic studies. And ethnic studies is not attempting to basically say white people are whack. It's saying there's a larger story and a larger context. Okay? The natives weren't basically saying that white people are superior. Oh, well, yeah, the good white brother was coming back. They were oriented for friendly white people. At least their orientation was, okay, we're not going to kill you on sight. We're going to give you gifts. We're going to give you, you know, welcome you with food, et cetera, and yeah, et cetera. But he was coming to discover and conquer. So this narrative, or any narrative, a story, is a construction. It explains all that comes after, but pretty much none of what came before. So the narrative of contact, okay? Nothing happened before contact. There's no history here before 1492, October 12, 1492. It's not taught. Oh, right. Columbus discovered America. Who did he discover? Indians. Okay, well, which nation of Indians? Oh, I don't know. Well, what's the name of the island? Oh, I don't know. Where was it? Oh, in the Caribbean. What did the natives call it? Oh, we don't know. What's the name of the native? Oh, we don't know. Notice, if this is the first time I've called your attention to this, you might have been like me, that little kid in third grade who go, okay, well, discover means, in the dictionary, it means you found something first, but if the Indians were there, then he didn't find it first. They were there. What's their story? Shut up, Mark. Really, that happened. You might have had that same experience, right? So the narrative of contact. Nothing important happened before contact. And I see this repeated, and of course I'm an ethnic studies teacher, so when there's this thing called democracy school in which they're, lefty folks trying to organize for local food rights, and basically they talk about where democracy came from, and in their point of view, what they teach their narrative, democracy they start their narrative with the Magna Carta. Wait, they don't even start their narrative here. Like there was democracy here. Older than the Magna Carta, because the Magna Carta basically is a deal between the nobles and the king. And the serfs had no voice, which is how we have a constitution which basically guarantees the right of corporations as citizens from the get-go, but the common people are not in it. We the people doesn't mean every human being present.
On purpose, too.
On purpose. Okay? So understand that. So we the people is not the same as all my relations. That's why I put that in the Aztec, because in Lakota it's a different phraseology, but the idea is that every human being is a citizen in our democracy and has a voice. And not just human beings. And not just the human beings present, but the ancestors and the unborn children have a voice, as well as the one-leggeds, the trees, as well as the four-leggeds, the animals, as well as the fish, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All my relations, all of them, rock people, all of them have rights, and we consider our effect on them, right? Which is not, so that's when I refer to indigenous democracy. That's the idea, all right? So the narrative of contact. Nothing important happened before contact. All that you need to know is what happened after contact. Okay, so notice that history is basically erased. And so, So Afrocentric tale-telling Afrocentric is not black-centric, it's like Africa. So not all people in Africa are black. The majority are, yeah. But it's basically, remember, it's understanding that Africa is a continent with 2,000 plus languages, and has been. So the way you can have a phrase like the enemy of my enemy is my friend is you have to understand the history. Where'd you get the beef? Where'd the beef start with your enemy? And their enemies, why do their enemies have beef with your enemy, and how can you make them your friend? In order to do that, you have to know the history of both and the language of both and where the beef started and how you resolve it. Right? So Afrocentric tale-telling. Tell the tale from the point of view of everybody that's in the tale. Because you need to know that as much as possible. So let's try and run that Columbus narrative again from an Afrocentric point of view. Cristobal Colon, that was the name that he was given. That's where we get the word colony or colonization. It's a process that erases the indigenous, their language, their history, their spirituality, their religion, and replaces it with your own. And that was his intent with the blessing of the church. Okay, so Cristobal Colon, an Italian sailor working for the Visigoth Spanish government. Now, the reason I say the Visigoth Spanish government is because for 700 years before 1492, the Iberian Peninsula, that is, Spain and Portugal, had been conquered for the second time by black Africans, the Moors. The first time they conquered it was 1150 BC, and they held it for 150 years until the Romans took it back. Okay? So, 711 to 1492. That's in the Dark Ages of Europe. Rome had fallen. So, black Africans, so it's, yes, they're Muslim, they're adherents of Islam, but the actual physical boots on the ground, so to speak, are black Africans, the Moors. All right? So the Visigoths, who were the indigenous European population, had been conquered for 700 years by the Moors. And then in 1492, and actually the mid-14th, 15th century, so 1400s, started reasserting their political control, and the Moors were driven out. Hold that thought for a second. So, the Visigoth Spanish government is who was Queen Isabella and her husband, right, employed Columbus on a voyage of discovery. They bankrolled it, right? So utilizing a Moorish navigator, Cristobal Colon, makes first contact for a particular group of Europeans with the Taino nation. The Taino nation, is who he made contact with, the Indians, as it were, at what the Taino referred to as Guanahani Island on October 12, 1492, according to the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that we live under, Pope Gregory. Okay, this is not the first contact for the Taino of seagoing people from other continents. This fact was noted in the logs from Columbus's second voyage with the Taino gift of guanine spear points. Okay, so the Taino greet Columbus, they give him gifts, and among the gifts were 2 gold spear points. So if you understand that gold is usually not a weapon because it's too soft. So you have to alloy it with other metals in a precise mixture to make it weaponizable. Okay, copper, silver, some other stuff. But copper and silver. That precise ratio was called guanine, and that's how the Taino identified it to Columbus when they gave it to him. So Columbus, in his second logbook, basically goes back, talks about these Taino spear points, and the Taino said, you know, because he asked where the gold was, because you know what happens with Europeans and gold. That's like legendary and stereotypical, right? Chris goes, yo, where's the gold? And the Taino say, these black guys had it from south across the water. And Chris goes, no way, man, I'm the first. No. So he goes back to the King of Portugal. He's kicking it with the King of Portugal, and he shows him the gold spear points, and the King of Portugal goes, oh, guanine. And he goes, and Chris goes, yeah, that's what those Indians said. And they said it came from these black guys south across the water. And the King of Portugal goes, yeah, it came from Ghana. Guanine came from Ghana. And he said, yeah, well, the king of Ghana has a gold nugget big enough to tie his horse to. Imagine that, right? So guanine, what we call today, is 14 karat gold. Same recipe. So, was Chris the first? No. Right? And even the King of Portugal, yeah, well, these Africans have been traveling back and forth to what you call the New World for like centuries. That's how your Moorish navigator knew that we ain't going to India. We're going to the circuit of the world. But, okay, whatever. You can believe that you're the first. Cool, whatever. Yeah?
How did the Portuguese king know that? Because of the previous Moorish...
Well, because there have been, because of the conquest, one, and two, there had been trade with Africa going back to 1000 AD. I mean, the Russians basically knew, Africans are being, bringing up gold and all this kind of stuff, you know, because where are the gold mines?
The internal European slave market as well.
Yeah, right. The you know, when you talk about internal slaves, it's like, right, white people are selling white people into slavery to the rich guys who are black. Right? So during the period between 711 and 1492, millions of Europeans are being sold by Europeans to the guys with money who are the black folks who control the spice trade, gold, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, there's another narrative that goes along with that. But you can find that, and there's a book called, written by this sister, Nell Irvin Painter. She's a black woman historian from Princeton, and she wrote a really cool book called The History of White People, where she basically, okay, this is the European account of what happened. And, oh, you know, you're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, you know, beauty ethic? Well, that came from slaves that were sold to black Africans in harems. By the way, who has harems, stereotypically? And why are they having harems? And how are they able to purchase white slave women from the Caucasus? And who's selling those white women? Other Europeans. And who are they selling them to? Black people for their harems. And if you Google the word odalisque, it basically paintings, classical paintings of the white women sold into slavery as sex slaves to black people. So I'm talking about millions of Europeans sold into slavery by Europeans. Notice how that kind of got erased in the Columbus discovered America narrative. But it is part of the historical fact told by Europeans if you're a scholar. And so Nell Irvin Painter, black woman, history of white people. She's saying, they kind of erased this from that narrative for a reason. Because if you're basically saying slaves, even though the word Slav, you go Slav, or the Slavic people comes from slaves. These people were slaved by white people. Well, they're white people, right? But when you think of slaves, you don't think of that in America. Who do you think of? Black folks. Huh. But who's been enslaved longer? Yeah, okay. So here, ethnic studies. We're telling a narrative that's true, but has been conveniently forgotten for political reasons, where politics is a science of power. Who has it? Oh, if you want to say that we've always had power, we're the best, we're God's chosen people, we're this, that, and the other, then you got to erase any historical fact to the contrary. Yeah.
And the Spanish are trying to short circuit that Middle Eastern trade controlled by other people
Yeah.
in order to save a lot of money.
Right. Sure. Right. Everybody wants to cut out the middleman and buy direct, right? Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of a little bit off topic.
Maybe it isn't.
Yeah, since the spearheads have a kind of similar name to what they said the island was named, is it possible that the travelers came over and they were using their term for it?
Possibly.
'Cause it seems fairly similar.
Yeah, that isn't in the narrative, actually. So I don't know. It's possible. I don't know. I don't know if there's any gold on Guanahani, but yes, you raise an interesting point. Okay, so Cologne, colonize, colony, and the doctrine of discovery. So you understand what the doctrine of discovery is then and how it affects now. Okay, Europe is coming out of the Dark Ages. They are projecting military force for basically the first time, maybe the first time in their history, but they're projecting military force globally. So one of the things that they learned, so if you understand that that the Roman Empire is trying to create a united, there was no united Europe in the Roman times. So what they're trying to do is Rome falls, that creates the Dark Ages, and coming out of the Dark Ages, Well, we need to create a united Europe. How do we do that? Well, we could do it with conquest, but the Romans were pagan. That didn't work. So what we need is, well, forgive me, but I have to put it this way. We need a weaponized form of Christianity as the glue, right? Because Jesus didn't have armies. Jesus didn't kill people. So the concept of Christian soldiers didn't come from Jesus. It came from the Romans. And the adherents of the Romans is the Roman Catholic Church. Catholic means universal. So if everybody's supposed to adhere to this particular value, what is the value? So, Chris comes back, 1493. There's 2 papal bulls. So what a papal bull is the Pope, who is God's representative on earth, makes a decree. That decree is law. The doctrine of discovery is a legal principle that dates back to this time that says that any Christian person in that time and up until the mid-19th century, Christian meant a white European only. Okay? And you can see this in the history and the nomenclature. When they're talking about a Christian, they're talking about a white person only, despite that Christianity had African origins. Okay? They're depicting Christ as a white person based on Michelangelo's depiction of him on the Sistine Chapel, which is essentially Michelangelo's uncle, who posed for that. Right? So not the Ethiopian model where Christ is a brown-haired, black-haired person. Brown-skinned, black-haired person. Right? Dating back to the 1st century. So, right. Who's the historical Christ and historically accurate Christ? Blonde Michelangelo's uncle or the Ethiopian model? Anyway, doctrine of discovery. Any Christian, any white person who discovers, that is, ain't no Christians here, so we discovered it, discovered non-Christian land, can claim that land for all of Christendom, planet-wide, forever. And the people who are on that land lose title to it forever. This is God's decree. 1493, and then there was another papal bull with a Portuguese pope, because we had separate popes then, right? In 1503. And then between them, the 2 popes come up with this line of demarcation. On this line, the Spanish get this, and on this line, the Portuguese get that. That's why in South America, Brazil's on one side of the line, it's the Portuguese, the other side of the line is Spanish. The New World, in case you were wondering about that. Okay? Doctrine of discovery. So that's 1493, the earliest one. And the reason I bring up the doctrine of discovery and Columbus discovered America, so it's not just a innocent use of language. It is a legal concept, which held until Johnson v. Well, it still holds today. Johnson v. McIntosh, a Supreme Court decision, prime case in Indian law, that is Native American law, case law. Okay? 2 white guys buy a same piece of land in Tennessee, Johnson and McIntosh. So one had bought the land at a land office, a real estate office, and another had inherited the land from the Indians. Who owns the land? Goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court rules, goes to the guy who bought it at the real estate office because the Indians had lost title by being discovered. Now, this is the mid-1800s when this decision, so they're going, the Supreme Court, the justice said in his ruling, the moral thing to do, because he's basically following the legal principle of stare decisis. Okay? Let the decision stand in Latin. So it's always good to understand Latin, because not only is it the language of science, it's also the language of law. right? Because, and who speaks that besides scientists and lawyers? Catholic Church. God only speaks in Latin? Really? So, stare decisis, let the decision stand. Okay, so courts rule based on other courts' decisions. Now, did he make a decision based on what the Iroquois Six Nations, which is an older established democracy with its own set of laws, did he make the decision based on that? No. He goes to Europe, and he cites the papal bull in his ruling, and he says, basically, well, if we were going to do the right and moral thing, he actually says this, then all Europeans should leave America. He says that. That's the moral thing to do. But we ain't going to do that. Boom, goes to this guy. All right? So understand, when I go back to the slide, if you would, when I talk about Cologne, colonize, colony, the doctrine of discovery, right? Christopher Columbus discovers America. Yeah, there's more to that phrase than just, oh, I found it first, or I found it for a particular group of people. So Taino, Guanahani, Guanine. Yeah, Eddie?
So the doctrine is basically a very convenient sort of legal precedent,
Yes.
Which suits
Right.
those who came after.
Right.
They ignore the original
Right.
so-called owners.
Right. Both Africans and Native Americans did not believe in real estate. Real estate literally means the king's land. Okay, basically it dates back to the time of serfdom, where first night rights, the king had the right to sleep with your wife on your wedding night, because you were you were his property. You and your wife. Well, that wouldn't fly in Africa, and that definitely wouldn't fly in America either. But, so we didn't believe in real estate. In fact, no human being could own the land because the human beings did not create the land. Creator created the land. So you can't sell something. That's like selling sunlight. Oh yeah, we do that. That's like selling the rain. Oh yeah, Bechtel attempted to do that. I'm not making that up, but we'll get to that at some point. But you know, that's why Evo Morales was the first indigenous person to be elected in Bolivia, because Bechtel, the American corporation, the multinational, if you will, built a hydroelectric system that was expensive. So poor people couldn't afford to hook up to the electrical grid or the water. So they were collecting rainwater, and Bechtel influenced the then government to basically stop people from collecting rainwater on the legal principle that Bechtel owned the rain. I'm not making this up, right? I mean, if that James Bond movie, Quantum of Solace, I mean, where the quantum is trying to set up a water system and jacking up, that's real. That happened with Bechtel. So then the people elected a new the first indigenous president, and he kicked, no, you ain't doing that. But, yeah, so part of the piece then is understanding in ethnic studies that we're telling a backstory and a story. Right? So in the African first contact, centuries before the mission, so centuries before, first contact with the Taino, the mission was trade and exploration, not conquest. In particular, European first contact exploration is colonization, slavery, and exploitation. I mean, just looking at what the history was. Because essentially, no African expedition came here, you know, like we didn't need to take land in North America. If you look at a true projection of the size of North America and Africa, North America fits within Africa. We didn't come here for land. We had Africa. We didn't come here for gold. We supplied our own gold. We didn't come here for conquest or enslavement. Just didn't do it. There were people who were building pyramids. We were pyramid builders too. Let me give you some technical assistance on that. And we did, right? But I'm not saying that black people did everything. Just saying that we did what we did. That's ethnic studies, right? So, what does the hero leave out in the narrative of the story? So, you should apply this principle to anything that I tell you, too. Because I'm not going to tell you something unless I got a source for it. Just not. All right, so ethnic studies is the interdisciplinary study of the stories that got left out of the narrative of Western civilization, also known as the traditional canon of Western civilization. Now, notice that word, canon. It's a song, okay? So the curriculum, Columbus discovered America, the one that justified the doctrine of discovery, that was taught. Okay, and it's an edited history. And yeah, so I'm telling a larger history in ethnic studies, and ethnic studies is you go to the grocery store, look which foods are in the ethnic section and which are not. Mayonnaise is not in the ethnic section, but salsa is, as well as pasta. So notice who's an ethnic and who's not. Who's doing the defining there? All right? So the traditional canon is basically that Columbus discovered America narrative of Western civilization. And notice what it leaves out, where it starts, where it doesn't go to, where it does go to. And we use basically the same standards of evidence where the evidence exists. That is, okay, somebody saw it, somebody wrote about it, great. If not, okay, we'll use archaeology, but we're not going to basically make the same conclusions. And sometimes we'll have to use myth, because sometimes people live their lives more influenced by myths than by science. Okay? Myths can get replicated like science. Right? We interrogate the traditional canon and its assumption of superiority and total knowledge. So when you interrogate something, it ain't a friendly Q&A. You will give up your secrets. And we might not be nice about it. So, for example, this came around the last time we delivered this class in 2012. So, remember the Cordoba Initiative? Maybe you don't. So, I'm just using it as an example of ethnic studies. The Iberian Peninsula, as I talked about, had been conquered twice by Africans, 1050 BCE, and then 711 in the Common Era to 1492. So, under their influence and rule, in Spain in particular, the city of Cordoba, or also known as Cordova, in the 10th century, was the largest city in Europe. So 10th century. Rest of Europe is still in the Dark Ages. That is technically the Dark Ages. But under Moorish conquest, while the rest of Europe was in the Dark Ages, Cordoba had the largest library on the planet. 1 million volumes. Now remember, not everybody read in Europe. But to have a library with 1 million volumes in your city, that's an accomplishment. Moorish conquest brought libraries, fountains, gardens, culture, medicine, science, architecture, mathematics, finance, and art. They fostered a religious tolerance which allowed the building of synagogues and churches as well as mosques. All this quote-unquote progress, I mean, would you call that progress? Okay, creation of religious tolerance where there wasn't, libraries, fountains. I mean, I'm a city person. I lack my amenities, right? Creating those amenities where they weren't there. And all that was erased later by the Inquisition after the reconquest by the Visigoths. So the indigenous European population. All right, so the Cordoba Institute, the Cordoba Initiative, sought to build an interfaith effort to combat extremism. Fox News called it a victory mosque. It's a victory dance because it's a couple of blocks away from the Twin Towers and 9/11, so we can't wait. It's going to be like a YMCA, except it's not Christian. It's Islamic. So it's going to be, you know, there is going to be a mosque there, but it's also going to be a gym there and also an interfaith library. So, I mean, you know, this is from their website. Okay, and the idea is it's modeled after the historical city of Cordoba. So the person who's third from the right is the imam who's part of the Cordoba Initiative. But notice he has, you know, Catholics and Sikhs and other folks. So it's an interfaith effort, just like Cordoba. I guess Fox News don't like that. Y'all shouldn't be getting together like that. So again, ethnic studies is telling the backstory. And the last time we were doing the class in 2012, we basically said, you know, this is a big controversy then, in addition to, you know, the other stuff that was going on then. So I'm a Maroon griot. I'm an American Maroon. So a griot, or Jali, is a combination historian, diplomat, poet, musician, storyteller, and healer. A Maroon is an African native hybrid, a genetic and cultural hybrid. Maroon's a Taino word which means wild and free. Better than Black Indian. So Maroon. So I begin tying opposites together using diunital logic. So, for example, the hero is the teller of the tale. So talking about, you know, have you heard that Barack Obama is a Muslim, right? So these are memes that are in popular culture, you know, when he was first running and then after. He's a Muslim. So the evidence usually given for he's not a Muslim, he's Christian and been avowed Christian all the time. So the evidence given for him being Muslim is his middle name. So Barack Hussein Obama. So who was the biblical Barack? So he was a general mentioned in Judges, in your Old Testament. So he, you know, the good general Barak. Barak means also in Arabic, it means blessing. Okay, when you're given a name, in the old days, a name meant something. It also meant the aspirations that you had for the kid. Or you got named for either a relative or that you could emulate or a historical figure. Barak, the good general Barak, mentioned in Judges. The historical Hussein. So the historical Hussein was the prophet's grandson. Barak was named also for his African father, but raised by his Caucasian mother and his parents as a Christian. He's not raised in the African-American old school, but he did marry into it, so to speak. Now, the African-American old school is basically part of what I've been teaching you out of. This is not so much secret knowledge, but it's not knowledge necessarily that's taught in the traditional canon. So, African in America. So, Al-Kebulan, which is the traditional indigenous name of Africa, Al-Kebulan is the source of our strength. Ato Anta Tulipit Wapakisinep, also known as America, is the test of our strength. So Al-Kebulan and Africa mean the same thing in their respective languages. Africa is a Greek word which means land of the blacks. Al-Kebulan is an indigenous word in one of the 2,000 plus languages which means land of the blacks. Egypt is a Greek word which means land of the blacks. The indigenous people refer to it as Kemet, which means land of the blacks. Ethiopia means land of the people with the burnt faces. I mean, do we see a pattern here? Okay? So the traditional name for this continent here, Atalanta, that's the African name for it, Atalanta, which means water and metal, or Tulipit Wapakisinep, which is in an indigenous language which means the long-reaching land. Now, in Africa, Tulipit Wapakisinep, which is the indigenous name for this continent, was referred to as the circuit of the world. That means it's the only continent on the planet that stretches from the North Pole to the South Pole unbroken. Okay? And the only way you can know that is by sailing it. Right? But that's not in the Columbus discovered America narrative. Right? But it is known to his Moorish navigator who has magnetic compasses, longitude and latitude. Yeah, we not going to India.
The astrolabe.
Yeah, and they have the astrolabe, right. You know, a guidance device, sighting on the sun. So, Africa, strength through self-knowledge. American strength through creating fear and ignorance. I'm not unpatriotic, I'm just noticing that, okay, if the basic pattern here traditionally, like with the Taino, was speaking multiple languages, okay, the whole Thanksgiving thing, the sachem that greeted the quote-unquote pilgrims spoke French, spoke English, spoke Dutch, multiple languages, and basically told the colonists, hi, how are you? Who are you? By the way, I am this person, and the lands, the traditional lands to the north of us have this sachem, and this person has this many warriors. This person has this many warriors. The people to the south of you have this many warriors. Why do you think he's doing that? Yeah. All right. So, as the oldest people, that is Africans, it is our responsibility to remember. And this course is designed to help everybody do that, to remember. All right, so ethnic studies is the collection of tales told by the indigenous about themselves using their worldview. Africa, Greek name for Al-Kebulan. America is the European name for Tulipit Wapakisinep, the long-reaching land, or also, for short, Turtle Island. Is from a book called Circular Thought. Atalanta, water metal, is the Comedian name for Turtle Island, also known as the Circuit of the World, only continent that stretches from pole to pole. This is a fiction from, for example, a fictional book basically drawn from historical sources called Shades of Memnon. So, the real African-American experience does not start in slavery in 1619. Okay? Which is why we don't start there either, this course. So, to say the African-American experience starts in 1619 is a lie, but repetition of a lie does not make it true. 9/11 was not planned by Saddam Hussein. Obama's not trying to take your guns, redistribute wealth, or put you under Sharia law. The African-American experience starts before there was even a united Europe, before there was a Western civilization. So, for example, our experience here, 850 to 1000 BCE or earlier, definitely 800 in the Common Era, so that's definitely before there's a Western civilization, even if you want to count the Greeks. Okay, so pre-Columbian. So we'll start in 1500 because it's a reasonable compromise between tales, I thought. So Kemet says that time began 36,000 years ago. Western civilization says Homo sapiens is nearly 250,000 years old. I'm splitting the difference. So here's an African American, Luzia. You heard of her? No? Okay. Well, she's the name. This is the name for a skeleton of a woman found in a cave in Brazil. And some archaeologists feel that she may have been part of the first wave of immigration to South America. That is basically either over the land bridge theory or, traveling in boats from Asia or whatever their story is. She's named in homage to the famous African fossil Lucy, who lived 3.2 million years ago. The 11,500-year-old skeleton was found in Brazil by Annette Laming Emperor. Her racial features are different from Native Americans. Anthropologists have described her variously as resembling those of Negroids, indigenous Australians, Melanesians, and the Negritos of Southeast Asia. Walter Neves, an anthropologist at the University of Sao Paulo, suggests that Lucius most strongly resembles an Australian Aboriginal people. And Richard Neve undertook a facial reconstruction of her, describing her as Negroid. And theorized that her predecessors lived in Southeast Asia for tens of thousands of years after migrating from Africa and began arriving in the New World as early as 15,000 years ago, which is part of why I started in 15,000, but I have other reasons too. Basically, 15,000 years ago is before the pyramids are up. But before the pyramids are up. So how do you create a pyramid? And don't tell me space aliens. I'm not buying that. Though I could if I wanted to. But I'm not. Okay? So if humans created the technology or a civilization that could create pyramids, what do you need to make a pyramid? And how long does it take to develop that if you start like 185,000 years before? How long does it take to create a replicating civilization to do all the things you need to do to make a pyramid? And I'm saying that could exist like 15,000 years ago based on some of the readings that built this class. So, African diunital logic. This example is a statue of a woman with breasts and a penis. Now, such people exist. Yeah, we call them by the scientific nomenclature hermaphrodites, but we also refer to them as intersex people. So the union of opposites. So in Africa, you have traditionally 12 kinds of marriage. So obviously not just same-sex heterosexual. 12 kinds of marriage, which includes group and tribal. 2. But this statue is an example of, why would you what's the symbolism behind creating an image with breasts and a penis together? Do such people exist, or what would you be trying to portray with that? Just a rhetorical question. African American, the Olmec heads in Mexico. This is one narrative basically says that this is Memnon, who was at Troy, despite the movie with Brad Pitt. Okay, there were black people at Troy. This is according to the Aethiopus, which is like a Homeric poem, like the Iliad. Aethiopus, basically the story about Troy, and it mentions Memnon and the honorable Ethiopians who were at Troy. He was killed by Achilles, and his mother, Eos, the Dawn, petitioned Zeus to bring him back, and so Zeus brought him back. And thereon he was said to leave and sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That is west towards Turtle Island. This was a voodoo ritual that I participated in at least as a witness in West Africa. The person in the center is being ridden by a spirit. This is the sacred snakes in Benin over my belly. This is Queen Nzinga, Angola warrior queen, and General Harriet Tubman, who was the military commander of the Battle of Combahee, which freed 700 slaves in 1 week. This is Elmina Castle in Ghana, and the door of no return through which slaves were taken to the New World, so-called New World. And this is across the bay from Cape Coast Castle, which was the British fortification for the same purpose, except over that door of no return is an Ifa or Vodun altar over the door of no, basically indigenous African religion, tribal religion, which is built over that door of no return, basically to honor the ancestors. So an attempt to develop healing. Thank you. 5 minutes. And this is a sculpture placed at the Tree of Forgetfulness near Ouida Beach in Benin, near the door of no return. Basically, the idea was that the chiefs marched slaves counterclockwise 3 times around this tree, which no longer is there anymore. But the idea was that if we march you 3 times around this tree, if you die, you will forget where you came from, and your spirits will no longer haunt the chiefs. Right? So the idea is, oh, now we want you back. We want you to come back, the descendants of slaves. So one of the things that my experience in Africa, taught me is like a lot of the chiefs said, oh, forget slavery, put it out of your mind. Well, no, we ain't gonna do that. But we will come back to Africa. Check it out. So, class housekeeping. Reading, The History of Africa, The Quest for Eternal Harmony by Molefi Kete Asante, and To Make Our World Anew, edited by Kelly and Lewis. So, with supplementary readings and other information as assigned. So, expectations for reading. If you do not read, you'll be limited to what I present, which, while entertaining, is not complete. So, in the African American experience, a test is life. Life is a test. So reading actually requires you to think, which, while hard work, is an investment which pays off in potential freedom. Do the reading assigned before class starts. Take notes on what you read. Note where you have questions. Compare them to your lecture notes. These notes will help you with your papers. So writing. You can't pass the class without writing. And it better be your writing. So if I discover through the usual means that you've plagiarized a paper, you'll receive a failing grade in this paper. So reaction papers are to be up to 2 pages in length, single to 1.5 spaced, around 12-point font size. At minimum, they should be between 250 to 300 words. And as an example, in the syllabus, the numbered paragraphs 3 and 4 contain 375 words combined. So if you email me the paper, keep a hard copy in case of electronic or protein glitch. 2 minutes, thank you. There are 5 of the reaction papers due every other week in even weeks. This is week 1, so your first paper isn't due till next week. At close of business, 5 o'clock next Wednesday for each week. No penalties for late work other than those for a half-stepping job. So what do I want in the reaction papers? Not only emotional reactions, but, think, too. So there's also a research paper, which is all defined in the syllabus. And doing the test and no writing gets you an F. The test, the midterm, and the final or take-home open book. And that's pretty much. The first extra credit assignment is the frontispiece, pages in Roman numerals 10 and 11, and then 1 through 14. So read the frontispiece, the dedication page, and define the differences. The first and last names referenced in the list of dedications, his teachers, particularly African historians, and define the difference between hominids and pongids, and list all the life forms referred to in italics on page 351. And then I will see you Wednesday. Till then. Yeah, right.